Paris, Texas is one of the most beloved new acts in alternative hip-hop. Since bursting onto the scene in 2021, they've cultivated a tight-knit fanbase and gotten some great looks, like playing Coachella in 2023 and opening on Tyler the Creator's Chromacopia tour as we speak. They've been steadily building steam and just capped it with 2 excellent EPs. They Left Me With a Sword and They Left Me With a Gun. So it might surprise you to learn that their debut album Mid-Air got absolutely panned by the internet's busiest music nerd Anthony Fantano. Melon put on the red flannel to give them a light 3 out of 10. But it might surprise you even more to learn that one of the members of Paris, Texas, Louis Pastel, went on his IG story to say, "Yo, don't jump on the Anthony hate train. We're still a fan of bro, lol. This is secretly the best thing that could happen." Louis is right. Plenty of artists have been able to push past a bad review to become some of the biggest acts of their generation. In fact, 3 of the hugest artists in the past decade or two got their first album absolutely panned by one of the biggest review sites on earth. But that doesn't mean that the careers of those artists weren't forever impacted by that negative critical reception. So today I'm going to look at their stories. I'm going to look at their first albums and those reviews, and how they responded in their careers to get to where they ended up. Did it affect their aura? Bro, what do you want me to do? Like, it's a layup. Like, the company is called... This video is sponsored by Aura. Last week I got 3 separate spam texts offering me some job that probably doesn't even exist. I don't know why they think I need a job. I'm clearly a rich and famous YouTuber. These ad reads just bought me a penthouse in the West Village. There is one job though that I would never do, and that's be a data broker. If you've never heard of them, what they do is they collect personal information about people like you or I, and then sell it to others so they can bombard us with ads, emails, spam texts, and maybe even a fake job. Why waste your time answering spam calls, giving yourself the dopamine of getting a text message just to find out it was a scammer when you can get Aura? Aura will help you remove your personal information from data brokers and people search sites that can sell your info to identity thieves, scammers, and more. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points, like the dark web and public court records, to alert you about potential identity theft. You'll get notified in minutes when your credit file has been compromised, like if someone tries to open credit cards or loans in your name. This is just scratching the surface of what you can get with Aura. There's Aura VPN, which protects your internet connection with military-grade encryption. There's antivirus services to secure your Android, PC, or Mac from malware, including viruses, spyware, trojans, ransomware, and more. And there's a US-based support team available around the clock if you ever need anything. You can get all this in one app at one affordable price. I'm not leaving myself or my family vulnerable to data breaches or brokers. And if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/HADJI to try 2 weeks for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into it. Before he was Mac Miller, Malcolm McCormick was Easy Mac with the cheesy raps, a high school-aged kid in Pittsburgh who started out chasing his hip-hop dreams with the help of the internet. He was born at the perfect time to be doing that. The boom of the mixtape era. 2 of those mixtapes, Kids and Best Day Ever, had gained Mac a pretty locked-in fanbase in the digital terrain. He was making fun and carefree music. Song titles like Senior Skip Day and Kool-Aid and Frozen Pizza can paint that picture for you without even clicking play. But when you do, you get boom-bap beats with lyrics about grinding, partying, and smoking. Having fun and really encapsulating that moment in like senior year of high school where you got into college already and none of your schoolwork becomes important anymore. Best Day Ever saw the production get a little bit more modern for the time, with the unfortunately named hit song Donald Trump, but that carefree energy maintains. Labels in this moment had a really hard time understanding how internet buzz could translate to actual real album sales. To them, if you didn't have a radio hit, you were nothing. 2011, the year of Mac Miller's debut album, was when case studies that showed otherwise started to pop up. J. Cole, who had signed to Jay-Z's Rock Nation label in 2009, dropped his debut album Sideline Story without a hit song, although Workout became one a little bit later on, and blew expectations out of the water by doing 218,000 copies in its first week. Well, Mac, who was signed to an independent label, probably wasn't going to do numbers like that without the major label machine behind him. He became another reference to show what a blog-era rapper with a die-hard online fanbase could do on the charts. There was a lot to celebrate about Blue Slide Park when it released in 2011. This was still during the era where physical sales were king. So the charts were predictably dominated by major label releases who controlled the distribution and production of the actual physical CDs and got them into every store where a fan might be so that they were sitting on the rack. It was harder for the smaller guys, but despite the uphill battle, Blue Slide Park became the first independently distributed debut album to go #1 on the Billboard charts since 1995, doing 144,000 copies in its first week. Not everyone was celebrating though. Pitchfork's Jordan Sargent gave the album a measly 1.0, the meanest review in this video and one of the meanest in the publication's history. Although it's probably better than the Jet album that they gave a 0.0 and then didn't write anything and just posted the link to a video of a monkey peeing in its own mouth. But it's still not that much nicer than that. He's mostly just a crushingly bland, more intolerable version of Wiz Khalifa without the chops, desire, or pocketbook for enjoyable singles. Unless you buy into Miller's persona, and why would you? Blue Slide Park offers you nothing that you can't find done much more artfully by, say, Currency. The review doesn't spend much time talking about the music in any sort of detail. In fact, not one single song title from Blue Slide Park is mentioned in the body paragraphs of the review. Instead, the reviewer takes the opportunity to comment on Mac Miller the phenomenon, the white rapper existing in his own bubble. And the reason Miller's massive fans follow him is not because of his music, at least not completely. It's because he looks just like them. Because they can see themselves up on the stage behind him, if not next to him. He is an outsider, but he brings no outsider's perspective to his music. In a 2013 interview with Complex, Mac and his team opened up about the critical response to the album. One of the producers on the album, Dan, spoke about that Pitchfork review specifically. There's no way the album was as bad as that particular reviewer made it out to be. It felt personal. It wasn't like, here's why I don't like it musically. It was more like, here's why I don't like Mac Miller. Mac himself echoed similar sentiments in that interview. A lot of the reviews were more on me as a person. To be honest, that was even worse. You're 19, you're so excited to put out your first album, you put it out, and no one has any respect for you or what you did. From the perspective of a kid who was in high school and into rap at this time, but also online enough to be aware of music discourse, this review made me genuinely never want to go listen to Blue Slide Park until I started working on this video. And that's as someone who became a pretty big Mac Miller fan later on in his career. I had friends who were listening to Kids and Best Day Ever at the time, but I was never fully sucked into it. It's not that I disliked it, I was just like more interested by other things. Going back now and listening to it for the sake of this video, it's not like everything has aged super well, but I think it's a pretty reasonable representation of what that like turn of the 2010s polished blog era rap music sounded like. And honestly, it's pretty hard to see this as a 1 out of 10 album. It certainly does not crack the top 5 of Mac Miller's discography, but at the same time, it's not this huge departure from the mixtapes that people seem to like a lot. And perhaps being independent allowed him to avoid some of the more obvious pitfalls that artists tend to fall into with their debut albums. Like the obvious swing at a hit that kinda alienates the fan base, or the unnecessary features to try to convince people to click. The beat on Party on Fifth Ave is like a less annoying version of Macklemore's Thrift Shop. The title track is like a more polished take on the boom bap sound without going too pop with it. You can even hear glimpses of his singing voice on songs like Under the Weather and Diamonds and Gold that are real like precursors for what we get later in his discography. The warmer synth choices remind me of the type of music that was popular on the internet and that you would probably hear in like an Urban Outfitters or an American Apparel, which isn't necessarily a huge compliment, but it's also not as much of an insult in 2011 as that sounds like in 2025. This is an album without a ton of obvious standouts, but also doesn't really have any clear like straight up stinker songs. A 1.0 is way too harsh in my eyes, and to be fair, a lot of other critics felt the same way. The internet's soon-to-be busiest music nerd Anthony Fantano gave him a 5 out of 10. XXL gave him an L, which is their version of a 3 out of 5. But to Mac, that Pitchfork review hung over his head like a dark cloud, and drastically altered the path that his career would take from here on out. You can immediately hear it in the music when you click play on his next project, 2012's mixtape Macadelic. Starting the album out with girls moaning and speaking French tells you right from the jump that you are getting something very different than Blue Slide Park. The second bar is, I got a pocket full of posies, some devil with a pitchfork keep talking like he know me, which is almost definitely a double entendre and a shot at the magazine. Looking ahead at the track list and all the features, legends like Lil Wayne, Juicy J, and Cam'ron, blog-era contemporaries like Sir Michael Rocks, Kendrick Lamar, Casey Veggies, and Joey Badass, it's clear that Mac took the idea of being an outsider very personally. Not to mention the singer and the producer Iman Omari, who had a big hand in a lot of music that I really liked around that time, especially his own EP, the Midnights EP. Highly recommend listening to that. The beat selection here on Macadelic is way weirder and way cooler than Blue Slide Park. A personal favorite of mine has always been Aliens Fighting Robots. I was also a big fan of The Question with Lil Wayne, and I would love Fight the Feeling even more if it wasn't for like the sex skit at the end of the song. I've always wondered what compels artists to do that shit. And like, what is the vibe in the studio session when they're dragging that into the project? Not even like on some prudish shit. it's just like, I don't want to hear that right now. But I mean, you know, creative freedom, you win some and you lose some. Just listening to Macadelic on surface value in terms of quality, hearing the leaps forward in creativity and originality, you might think that Mac was in a great place. Unfortunately, it was the opposite. In the 2013 interview, he talked about how bad his lean addiction had become during that Macadelic tour. I was so fucked up all the time, it was bad. My friends couldn't even look at me the same. I was lost. Mac was able to quit lean later that year, but his struggles with drugs would sadly continue to follow him throughout the rest of his life. Musically, he continued to push boundaries, on arguably like a very steady, consistent upward trajectory throughout the rest of his career. And if you were a studio album guy and you didn't get Macadelic, 2013's watching movies with the sound off would be such a huge jump scare coming off of Blue Slide Park. And then 2014's Faces mixtape took an even weirder and darker turn, adding like exponents to how much more twisted he could get. Those earlier habits came back around to bite him during that time, which he then spoke about with Billboard ahead of his 2015 album Good AM. I was doing a lot of drugs around that time, which is another difference now. I'm not doing as many drugs. It just eats at your mind, doing drugs every single day, every second. It's rough on your body. I'm not completely sober, but I'm way better than I was at that point. We all know the tale of Mac Miller, but I want to caution against placing like the blame on what ended up happening in his life on one bad review. It seems a bit more accurate to look at that review as one of the many straws on the camel's back that you have to imagine in terms of dealing with the stresses that come with fame, a fickle music industry, cameras in your face all the time, and the everlasting issue of how you perceive yourself versus how others perceive you, all placed on the shoulders of a 19-year-old kid. From a creator's standpoint, we can see how he took the comments that he was some outsider in hip-hop with no real issues in his life to talk about personally, and how it shaped his music and turned him into one of the legendary figures of the last 20 years of hip-hop. He's far from the only artist to use early criticism in his career as a shaping point, so let's look at another example. Before most knew Donald Glover as a musician, they knew him as Troy on the NBC series Community. Donald had moved from Stone Mountain, Georgia to the Big Apple to go to NYU, where he then got into a career of comedy writing for shows like 30 Rock before eventually getting his shot in front of the camera, which he was already doing on YouTube through channels like Derek Comedy. Meanwhile, he was starting a burgeoning rap career under the name Childish Gambino, one that he infamously got from using a Wu-Tang Clan nickname generator. His earliest projects like Cul-de-sac and EP were building him a cult fanbase on the internet around his geeky but endearing and clever punchline-driven rap style. Songs like Freaks and Geeks were packed to the brim with jovial and crude lines like "An elephant never forgets, but my d remembers everything," and "I got some that was insane, so insane it's an enemy of Batman." Even the title of that song is a reference to a niche cult classic sitcom that was canceled after one season, which says a lot about the pockets of the internet that he was reaching with his early raps. It was a group that wasn't necessarily being represented in a lot of other areas of rap music around that time. But to place him somewhere, his cartoonish rap flow fit in with like the hashtag rap style that was very popular in the mainstream. Coming from younger blog era guys like 2000s era Drake and Big Sean, more regional rappers like Fabulous, and late career guys like Ludacris. Where he stood out from those guys, for better or for worse, was what his punchlines were about. Niche references about bands and movies and cultural phenomena. And moments where he would explore his identity as a black guy who was called white for some of those very interests that he was punchlining about. And then sprinkle in some bars about the most outlandish ways he could come up with talking about his penis and his sexual escapades. The songs weren't necessarily comedic in their overall goal or their content, not like a Lil Dicky song or something like that. But at the same time, you could tell that Donald's experience writing for comedy TV and doing stand-up was influencing the way that he rapped. As he slowly but steadily built that online fanbase, he signed to Glass Note Records, an independent label that at the time only had indie rock or pop acts. He dropped his debut album with them, Camp, in November of 2011. Well, there were songs on there that had similar styles to his earlier stuff like Freaks and Geeks, songs like Bonfire and You See Me. The tone of the album was also a bit more somber, and he got more personal and open about feeling like an outsider in music and in life in general. In addition to adding synthier and poppier aspects to his sound, especially on songs like Heartbeat. His fans generally enjoyed the album in the moment, but the critical response was all over the place. Consequence of Sound gave the album an A-, saying he can really rap, plus sing and emote, and put on a show better than 90% of his hip-hop counterparts. The Rolling Stone review gave him a more middling 3 out of 5, saying he fiends for approval but also has some breathless zingers. But there were reviews like this, and then there was the review, the 1.6. Ian Cohen reviewed the album for Pitchfork just 6 days before the Blue Slide Park review came out, and absolutely laid into it, calling it one of the most uniquely unlikable rap records of this year and most others. While Pitchfork accused Mac Miller of being an outsider and an interloper in hip-hop, Gambino gets the inverse criticism here, with Cohen writing that he uses heavy topics like race, masculinity, relationships, street cred, and real hip-hop as props to construct a false outsider persona. He digs into Gambino's squeaky voice, groans at his punchlines, and makes the point at the end of the review that 2011 was actually a pretty good climate for a rapper like him. And maybe he wasn't as much of this outsider that he was presenting himself as. To be fair, it appears that Cohen and Glover knew each other in some capacity, and there are some internet rumors that they had some interesting public brush-ups since then. I don't want to comment without knowing the facts, but if you have any of the tea related to that, I've tried to find it on the internet. Please put it in the comment section. The world needs to know. There are so many parallels here between Mac and Gambino. The first starts with them both directly responding to Pitchfork on Wax. Just like Mac, Gambino was addressing it in bars by the next year. The track We Ain't Them, released ahead of his 2012 mixtape Royalty, addresses the review both directly and indirectly. The former comes in lines like, "Speak from your heart and never compromise what you feel's real and never let these white people tell you how to feel." The latter comes on a line where he directly references the score he got in that Pitchfork review 1.6 to address how some people around then just stopped hitting him up because they probably felt like it wasn't convenient to do so anymore. When Mac was crucified by Pitchfork for his debut album, he chose to respond with a danker, weirder mixtape in 2012, full of collaborations to help shake that outsider tag that they tried to place on him. We Ain't Them went on to become the intro to a very similar Childish Gambino project, Royalty. Just like Mac, he set out to collaborate with a bunch of his blog-era peers to show that not only could he fit in, he could stand out. I did a full deep dive on Royalty earlier this year, and in the video I describe how everything from the feature choices to the track listing to the beat selection to the order of the rappers on each song was genetically engineered to help Gambino win over some fans. So I'll link that video in the description so you can check it out. But Royalty is just one half of the tale, because Gambino's next studio album, Because the Internet, is the one that really rewrites his story, especially when you consider that a lot of more casual fans probably don't even know that Royalty exists. The squeaky voice punchlines from Camp and previous works are nowhere to be found on BTI, but the themes of loneliness and outsiderism remain. They've just taken on a new form, one that was more mature, and also reached further into different genre bags of R&B and neo-soul to get that point across. Donald Glover's experience in film and screenwriting gives him a unique perspective when it comes to being a musician. In his earlier work, you can see the through line and the way he delivers his punchlines with the wackiness of a guy who was writing one-liners and jokes for a comedy show. On Because the Internet, when you look at the surrealist music videos, full-on screenplay attached to the project, the use of Foley and negative space on tracks like Sweatpants to create this eerie feeling, it gels with the message of the music instead of detracting from it like maybe some people felt his earlier work did. Well, Because the Internet definitely did not convert every Donald detractor into a devotee, it did a lot to reset the narrative after the Camp review fiasco. And in a 2013 interview with Vice, Glover actually thanked the publication. Pitchfork helped me a lot. First of all, there's no way I can make something worse than that. It would be impossible. It put a lot of people on my side too. This started a conversation about what Childish Gambino stands for. I know people are gonna trash the music. I see them doing that shit, and I see where they're coming from. There's shit on Camp where if I saw it as a kid, I would say that shit is corny, and I'm willing to take that. Chris Rock always says to me, humble brag, it's never the audience's fault. If I'm not respected, that's on me. I'm finally cool with people saying this is dumb or this is stupid, because I've realized that I'm not going to be around to realize if that's true or not. All I know is it's dope to me, and that's what matters. I'm done pandering. I was definitely pandering for a long time, but I feel like it doesn't help. I definitely used to make things because I knew people would be comfortable with them, but I'm done with that. On paper, so much of what came with Because the Internet could be trashed as dumb or stupid. There is a screenplay with, at best, tangential relation to the music. There's a song that uses a fictional song by the artist Lloyd playing on the radio to set the scene. There's Clapping for the Wrong Reasons, the weird 25-minute short film with a very loose plot that came before the album, starring a popular P-word star and Topanga from Boy Meets World. These things on paper might not make any sense, but they created a world of intrigue and fascination in a way that nothing on Camp ever did, to me at least. And that's coming from someone who liked Camp when he was 15 or 16. It's fair to wonder if the harsh reaction to Camp was the wake-up call that Donald needed to lean fully into his polyglot sensibilities and become the fascinating character that he is today. Where Camp felt at times it was pleading to the detractors that he expected to come his way based on how he looked and how he sounded, the public reaction to it was what taught him to care less about what those guys thought, and the art was better off for it. While Mac and Bino both publicly acknowledged their bad reviews while they were still relatively hot off the presses, a third contemporary didn't speak on them until much later. Kid Cudi had the benefit of going into his debut album with a genuine hit under his belt already. Day and Night was an early blog era smash, rocketing the Cleveland-born and New York-living rapper into the industry. That song, along with the mixtape it was on, A Kid Named Cudi, got him the chance to work with Kanye West on his infinitely influential album 808s and Heartbreak. Cudi's vocals were on the second track, Welcome to Heartbreak, but his fingerprints were all over the rest of the album too, with 4 total writing credits. The combined success of Day and Night and 808s got Cudi a major label record deal with Kanye's imprint Good Music. This early buzz also got him placed on the 2009 XXL freshman cover, which was only the second iteration of the now annual honor. He stood up there with Wale, B.O.B., Charles Hamilton, Asher Roth, Corey Guns, Blue, Mickey Fax, Ace Hood, and Currency, who were all together crowned the future of hip-hop. All of these acts brought something a little bit different to the table. And some of Cudi's standout attributes included his unique voice, his use of melody, and his frank and honest approach to writing about topics like mental health, loneliness, and depression, things that not every rapper would just willingly get up there and talk about, especially not in 2008. All of this would be on full display with his debut album, Man on the Moon, The End of Day. The album included a previous hit in Day and Night, but spawned another with Pursuit of Happiness, a hit in its own right that also had a Steve Aoki remix that was almost as popular, perhaps best immortalized by its use in the trailer for the 2012 party movie Project X. Tracks like Cudi Zone, Soundtrack to My Life, Up Up and Away are some of the most beloved Cudi songs. Commercially, the album did 104,000 units in its first week, only clocking in at number 4, but nonetheless, very strong sales for the debut album of a rapper in 2009, especially one who got all his fans from the internet. But not everyone was one of those fans. Ian Cohen, yes, the same guy who reviewed Camp, reviewed the album for Pitchfork, with the final score of 4.1 being pretty negative, albeit a bit better than Camp or Blue Slide Park. This is a good time for an important sidebar that, as far as I understand it, Pitchfork writers of the review do not actually choose the numbers. It's the other editors who get together and read the piece and think, what's a number that would fit with this? So it's not necessarily Ian Cohen saying 1.6, he's just influencing that. Referring to that final score, Cohen wrote that number up there isn't a judgment of Cudi's pain as much as it is an ability to express it. He spends most of the review calling Cudi's lyrical style a bad combination of overly simplistic and woe is me emo. With the album being narrated by Common and Cudi being referred to as our hero throughout, it can come off a bit self-serious to someone who's not fully buying in. As someone who was in the 9th grade when this album came out, those critiques never reached me because I wasn't reading Pitchfork, but if they did, they would have fallen on deaf ears. I like this album a lot. I listened to it a lot on my way to football practice, along with The Blueprint 3, which Cudi was also featured on. Going back to it now as a 29-year-old, which also, based off this tweet that I found, I think is the exact age that Ian Cohen was when he reviewed the album, I do get the criticisms a bit more, but I'm still very thankful for what this album meant to me back then. Cohen himself even acknowledges how catchy some of the album is, admitting that his hooks have a way of burrowing into your brain, and he leaves the review with the door open for album 2 to potentially change his mind. It makes you think things could get better if Cudi manages to cheer up in the future. For anyone who's heard 2010's Man on the Moon 2, that's not exactly what happened. And to me, I'm glad Cudi didn't take that advice, because I think Man on the Moon 2 is his magnum opus. The funny thing is, if you had asked Cudi around the time, he would have told you that the sequel was more fun. He told MTV.com before the album that his next album was going to be the complete opposite of what Man on the Moon was. Man on the Moon was so serious. This one is going to be more playful and fun. It's about having a good time. I think the more accurate way to say it is that Man on the Moon 2 is about the hazards of having a good time, delving into drug use and the rocky personal life that Cudi had around this time. Spending a night in jail, punching fans, it was a trip. I think the synths on Man on the Moon 1 sound a lot warmer. Although there are moments on the second album where the sound is a bit happier, maybe like Erase Me with Kanye, or moments where he sounds really cool and confident, like the hero that Common kept saying he was on the first one, on songs like Ash and Kusher or Mojo So Dope. Some of my favorite Cudi songs ever are on here. Songs that I think are necessary to understand the appeal of Kid Cudi. Mr. Rager, The End, which is like an endlessly cool sounding song, Marijuana, Maniac, These Worries. Pitchfork even had to hand it to him a bit. The 6.7 score for Man on the Moon 2 was a marked improvement over what he got for the first one. And the reviewer, Jason Green, admits that it tweaks his formula enough to at least hint at the massive promise Kanye sees in him. The album's success crystallized the fanbase that had started to coalesce around A Kid Named Cudi and Man on the Moon 1, and made him the guy he is today, who has genuinely one of the most supportive and locked-in fan bases in hip-hop. Well, it seems in the moment like Cudi maybe didn't pay too much attention to that review. In recent years, he's admitted otherwise. A fan tweeted at him in 2021 about the original Man on the Moon score, saying that it needed to change, and he replied, "Pitchfork has never given me good ratings, and here we are, years later and I'm still here. It's okay, man. They don't need to change it. The entire world knows. even my haters, that this album was the one that changed hip-hop forever. Asked whether any reviews had bothered him specifically, he said, "I think when I was younger, I thought it would hurt my career. Like the fans would listen to the reviews and not give the music a chance. Then, I realized over the years after I survived each era and made album after album, that nothing anyone could ever say would stop my light." I want to caution against this video being taken as some like anti-journalism gotcha moment to go back to these reviewers and be like, "You were wrong, haha." I actually think music criticism is an essential part of a healthy music industry. For one, if everybody just said that everything was great, we know that labels and lazy artists would probably just give us a bunch of slop. And it's true that these mean reviews can come off as bitchy or pretentious or holier than thou. But we have to remember, to paraphrase the great Melon Man, it's just somebody's opinion. I personally get a kick out of reading harsh reviews of things that I like because it helps me understand why I like them and why others might not. A well-written review usually won't change the way that I feel about something. When I was younger, maybe it would make me insecure for liking that artist, but as a 29-year-old, I don't give a f about that shit. Instead, a well-written review will just get me to think about that album a little more critically and its place in the world rather than just like, I don't like. Critics are often tossed aside as somebody who can't do the thing that they're critiquing, so they're just jealous, or they're just failed musicians, or movie makers, or chefs, or whatever art that they're critiquing. They failed at that thing. But that framing of critics as snarky, cynical burnouts is relatively new in the history of criticism. As highlighted in A.O. Scott's book, Better Living Through Criticism, although remember we're hearing this from a critic, so of course he's gonna say this, some of the greatest writers, like T.S. Eliot, had careers as critics of other writings. And some of the biggest directors in French New Wave cinema, like Jean-Luc Godard, I don't know if I said that right, but I'm gonna roll with it, got their start as film critics. Of course, we, as fans, as consumers, as musicians, we can use the same logic that critics apply in their work and criticize the criticism. The Blue Slide Park review, for example, does not mention a single song on the album by name. It's a review of Mac Miller the Phenomenon LARPing as a review of Blue Slide Park the album, and that is an extremely flawed album review. If we're gonna believe the rumor mill, then the Camp review might be flawed, because clearly the reviewer and the artist might have actually known each other in real life. I don't think the Man on the Moon review tries hard enough to understand the phenomenon of Kid Cudi and why people liked that Kid Cudi so much, especially when we see what Kid Cudi went on to become. But that doesn't invalidate these pieces fully. The same way that these harsh reviews don't immediately invalidate the artist's work. As a musician myself, I'm also sympathetic to these guys, having to not only read the harsh critiques themselves, but they're on display for the whole world. Devil's advocate for their fans and fuel to their detractors. When you got a bad grade on an essay at school, at least you could pretend like you lost it so your parents never had to see it. It's one of the hardest parts of being a public figure. And because so many humans desire to be one, especially today when all you might need is an iPhone, and the algorithm can change your life and make you famous overnight, sometimes empathy is thrown out the window. We see two sides of that. One where artists are told to stop whining about what could be a foundation-shaking and deeply personal critique. And the other when reviewers are just doing their job, only to get greeted by an angry mob of the "Keep Yourself Safe" acronym on Twitter, just because they have an opinion on an album. But the thing I want people to take away from these reviews, and this video in general, is the power of growth. It's incredible to see where these artists ended up going, whether or not they had vocal detractors at the beginning of their careers. And it really makes you wonder what panned album might get revisited in the future. I think that Fantano Paris, Texas review, for example, might be looked back on. Let me know what other review you think will be seen as too harsh 10 years from now. And let me know what you want me to cover next. If you like videos on music like this one, I really appreciate a like and subscribe. I post a video every week. If you want to see them early, go to my Instagram, HADJI Gaviota, throw me a follow, and join my broadcast channel. I post all my videos in that channel one day early for free. Also, I am going on tour, like literally right now, pretty much. If you live in the West Coast, the Midwest, or New York, there's a pretty good chance I'm coming to your city in the next couple weeks. I can't wait to see you there. Tickets are in the description. This is editing HADJI in the future, where my voice has inexplicably gotten a lot deeper. I have a song called Synonym coming out at midnight everywhere, but if you're watching this video early, I'll put the link to the actual YouTube video in the description so you can check it out a little early. Yeah. Peace.